Hi, BookTube, and welcome to the first channel content for 2024. We're going to get started with a fiction review. Now, it's tough, this read what you own challenge, but not for the reasons you might be thinking. I thought I would be tormented by the desire to buy new books, especially Kindle books. I mean, it's easy to avoid going into bookshops, but, avoid going onto the internet? Yeah, not likely. But that hasn't been an issue. What's been an issue is making up my mind what to read next. I'd look at my bookshelves and it's like they've suddenly become a whole lot of squawking children all shouting out, choose me, choose me. And in the end, I've had to leave it to chance. That's what I've had to do. I assigned numbers to the books that seemed to be shouting the loudest, and then I used a random number generator, to tell me what I was going to read next. Okay, today we are reviewing The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel by Deborah Moggach. I read the 2012 Vintage Books paperback, which came out as after the major motion pictures, you can see from the cover art. But the original book by Deborah Moggach was titled These Foolish Things, and it was published in 2004. So let's go straight into the first question. Can I pitch this book? Well, what Deborah Moggach said she wanted to write was a comedy of manners. She was thinking about growing old and how in the United Kingdom there's concern now, and there was concern then, about how we're going to cope as a growing percentage of the population gets older. She was thinking also about how interconnected the global economy was, and how there were differences in cost of living, and how attractive a warmer climate could be. And then she imagined how possibly two brothers, Ravi and Sunny Kapoor, Ravi living in the UK, Sunny still living in India, how they came up with this imaginative business venture. They were going to invite white British pensioners to relocate to their retirement home in Bangalore. They'd taken a 19th century bungalow that had belonged to a colonial businessman and refurbished it. And of course, what their promotional brochure promises was one thing, and what the new arrivals experienced when they settled down into the Marigold Hotel is another, hence the source of some of the comedy. Comedy, it's very, very subjective. What one person finds funny isn't always what somebody else does. So I say, stay tuned for the whole of this review in order to decide whether this is the kind of book that's going to make you laugh or not. But before that, let's do all the practical, statistical things. My 2012 paperback version is 280 pages long. I definitely bought this book secondhand, yeah, but where? My copy has a red sticker on the base of the spine. And I remember that was some kind of price indicator wherever I bought it. And I had one idea where I may have got this, right? The person who watches television introduced me to cricket when I came to England. And believe it or not, I do enjoy watching the game. And whenever we go to matches that are played at the Northamptonshire County Ground, I love to visit. They have a small second-hand bookstore. It's underneath their old scoreboard. They have a new one, but they also have an old one. And I think they use these stickers so that the volunteers who come in to help out, they don't have to open up each book to find out how much to charge, right? They can just look at the sticker and know that everything read was a certain price. And in this case, everything read cost 75 pence. That's how much I paid for this book. I should also mention why I bought it. The 2012 paperback version, as you can see, it was bought out as a tie-in with the film. I didn't see the film, okay? If you've watched my BookTube newbie video, I never seem to see good films or acclaimed films or any films, really, when they come out. Check out my newbie video if you want to hear the full confession. I'd read one Deborah Moggach novel before this. I'd read The Ex-Wives, and I found it, amusing. So those were the factors motivating the purchase. And speaking of Deborah Moggach, we should look a little bit at her life. She was born in 1948, and both her parents were writers. And it's funny, on her website, she notes that even the daily sound of two typewriters at home, going all the time because both her parents worked from home, they didn't make her interested in writing when she was younger. She studied English at Bristol University, and then she took a variety of jobs, including one for Oxford University Press, and I think she also was training to be a teacher. But it wasn't until the 1970s when she spent 2 years living in Pakistan that she decided she'd start writing. She submitted articles to local newspapers at first, and then she began working on novels. And her first novel, You Must Be Sisters, was published in 1978. Now, Moggach's personal website will give you a list of all her books, because from 1978, she was coming out with a new book on a fairly regular schedule. She also wrote the script for the 2005 film version of Pride and Prejudice, the one that had Keira Knightley playing Elizabeth Bennet and Matthew Macfadyen as Mr. Darcy. And her most recent novel, titled The Black Dress, came out in 2021. Moggach has been chair of the Society of Authors. She worked for PEN's executive committee, and she's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Let's talk about the setting. The first 80 pages of this book are set in the UK. And that's because the narrative is dropping in on some of the characters who are going to become residents at the Marigold Hotel. The point is to give you their backstory, what made some characters decide that they were going to take their retirement in India, and also to reveal some coincidental connections between characters and set up some comic situations for later in the book. The remainder of the story is set in Bangalore, and that's the location these photographs were all taken from two different botanical gardens in the city. But before you get excited, most of the book's action takes place inside the Marigold Hotel, or in the courtyard garden around it. There's a couple occasions when the residents get out, but you don't get a great deal of description of the city itself. You get a sense of how much, that city has changed. It's going to be commented on, but this is not a book about Bangalore. The point of the setting, I think, is just to get an exotic or foreign vibe. Think of how Shakespeare comedies like A Midsummer Night's Dream or As You Like It, they take characters out of their familiar environment and then into a mysterious place. In Shakespeare's case, that's a forest. And then there's something about being in that new, unfamiliar surroundings that starts to get unexpected behavior from the characters in aid of the comedy. Okay, let's talk about the narrative viewpoint and the narrative voice. There is a third-person omniscient narrator in this book, and I'm sure there's a literary term for this. I don't know what it is. I'm going to call the narration style parental. That is, the story consists of the narrator telling the reader everything. Every motivation of the character because you're told it. You aren't left to deduce anything by just observing character actions or listening to dialogue. It's narration that some readers are going to prefer because it makes reading almost effortless. You don't have to do any thinking. And that can be helpful for anyone, say, who's trying to come out of a reading slump, or if you're reading when you don't feel well, or if you're just having trouble getting a lot of reading time, you're getting interrupted a lot. If you fall into that category, then, the only health warning I would give is that this novel has a lot of characters and the narrator switches viewpoints quite often. So if I was going to say anything was a difficulty about the book, it would be that. If you are not a fan of narration that does more telling than showing, and I got to include myself in that category, obviously you'll still find the book a very easy read, but, your overall experience it felt to me like I'd just got an unexpected long visit from some lovely but rather dull neighbors who talk about, soap opera episodes and road repairs. And just when I thought they might say their goodbye, they start up a new topic of conversation. I should explain, that doesn't make much sense. Moggach's novel, it doesn't round out to a nice ending for everybody all at once. At the 200-page mark, there were still several story threads that needed resolution, and there were others that hadn't even started yet, but they were going to, and so they would need resolution. And what it meant was that the final 50 pages, they felt a little bit like, okay, that petered out, but we're not yet done. Okay, but now we're going to end this. Okay. Oh, but now we got to start off and end this story. And okay, now we're going to, and I don't know. I found that a bit tedious myself. Does the novel fit a genre category? Well, yeah, it is a comic novel. But as I mentioned at the start of the review, comedy is such a broad brush category. And so the next questions I'm going to answer are intended to help you decide whether you would find the book humorous or not. So I'm going to start by looking at anything that stands out as an aspect of this novel. And what stood out for me was Moggach includes epigrams, at the head of every chapter. Very traditional sort of 19th century thing to do. They're mainly quotations from various Hindu and Buddhist teachers, but there are some that are Western as well. They seem to be very serious quotations. Inserting them into a comic novel kind of left me with question marks personally about how was I supposed to perceive them? Because in the novel itself, they do make fun a little bit of Western interest in Eastern spirituality. Moggach creates a particular character type. Her name is Teresa. She's an unmarried woman in her 50s who is kind of a spiritual searcher. You know, one of those people, she's been to all kinds of different retreats in India. She decided to become a vegetarian. She goes looking for these recognized famous swamis and gurus. But the moral of her story appears to be that she just dismisses all this as pointless, and it makes it clear that what Teresa really seems to need, what fixes her, is intimacy, you know, a closer relationship with her mother and a man in her bed. Yeah. And now, until I wrote that section of the script, I hadn't really fully realized that the misogyny that kind of drives that storyline. But okay, so we may as well go straight into talking about the problematic content and how that's going to affect perception of comedy. In 2022, Deborah Moggach gave an interview to the UK newspaper The Independent, where she admits that it would be more problematic if she were to try and publish The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel now. Interviewer Charlotte Cripps quoted Moggach saying that she created the novel originally, quote, from a position of love, but follows that claim with the assertion, quote, if I had to write it again, I would do it the same, whatever the world thought. Okay, so you've got an assertion about love juxtaposed with very strong defensiveness. So you've got to make of that what you will. What the world thinks is what sells books. And the humor in this novel, it does depend on readers finding racist, misogynistic, and homophobic characters funny. There are readers out there who do, but the comedy demographic overall has changed. Comic characters, as we know, they're usually types. They're not complex. In the case of The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, what Deborah Moggach seems to have done is created a character to represent every kind of ageist stereotype. You know, you've got the dirty old man who thinks he's more attractive to women than he actually is, more attractive to anybody, in fact, than he actually is. There's the meek and quiet mother who stopped learning anything new around about 1965, and so she's terrified of every form of technology. There is the one who's deaf, and so she mishears everything other people say. There's the curmudgeonly, grumpy old lady who refuses treatment from any of the non-white doctors in the hospital, and she suspects that everybody is out to rob or somehow swindle her. And then there's the one who thinks that their gay son is, you know, still waiting for the right girl to come along, right? Get the picture? Now, the reader demographic has changed, and so there are going to be some readers, and I include myself, who really are going to feel more oppressed than amused by the residents at the Marigold Hotel. The characters are types, yeah, but they're also recognizable. You know, I was reminded of a lot of very painful, tiresome visits to my in-laws, of many uncomfortable conversations, painful, stupid remarks from work colleagues, neighbors, taxi drivers, shop assistants, hairdressers, strangers at bus stops. Now, if you are like me, then if you find prejudice more depressing than comic, then The Best Marigold Hotel, it'll just fail to entertain you. I'm going to admit, I was tempted at several points to DNF this book, and the only reason I carried on was because I wanted to be able to give you guys a credible review. So, hopefully, I've done that. Any suggestions for related or follow-up reading? Well, obviously, personally, I won't be looking for anything related. I felt the best follow-up would probably be something written about the subcontinent by a subcontinental writer. And I've got a number of choices from the books that I own. I've got a slender volume of short stories by Anita Desai. And of course, there was the novel that I highlighted back in my coffee break about independent publishers, Nectar in a Sieve by Kamala Markandeya. I've also owned A Fine Balance by Rohiton Mystery. I've got that in ebook and in paperback. And you know, that's probably waited the longest to be read. Okay, well, my next video, everybody, it's going to be another one of those book non-hauls, you know, where I showcase books that I did not buy during the month of December. And I also give a shout out to the BookTube creators who brought those books to my attention. Thank you very much for that. Hope you are all keeping well. Hope you are all reading well. So everybody, until then, take care. Bye-bye.